Hey guys, Augee from TNVC here. Just wanted to do a quick video to discuss some of the mount options for mounting a PVS-14 monocular night vision device to a helmet setup. Now, this video is pretty much for single devices used in a monocular format. The PVS-14, is probably one of the most ubiquitous night vision devices out there. It's been issued by the US military for over 20 years, so a lot of guys have had a lot of experience using the PVS-14. What they may or may not have had experience with is some of the different options that are available for utilizing and mounting the PVS-14 to a helmet setup. So the setup that most people are probably the most familiar with is this USGI Rhino. It's been manufactured by Neurotos for, close to 20 years now. It has been replaced in a lot of the issued kits with the Rhino 2, which is a little bit of an update to this legacy Rhino, but this is probably what most people think of and what most people are most familiar with if they've been issued a PVS-14 in the military. And you can see here how it gets the name Rhino. You can see it kind of has that little horn there, especially with the night vision device mounted over the head. So this part here is what's typically referred to as the mount. And there are a couple of different mount types, but just in general, a lot of people get confused when we start throwing out terms there. They want to know what part is what. So this is the USGI Rhino mount. This is Wilcox L4 G11 Army mount. Wilcox L4 G24, and I'm going to discuss each one of these independently, but it's probably worth discussing what the different components of a mount setup are. So as you can see, the mount is the component that clips into the shroud and attaches to the helmet. So on this ops core bump, it's actually a molded in polymer shroud, but there's a number of different configurations of night vision shrouds. So again, the most familiar issued version is this one-hole shroud that usually goes in front of an ACH and screws in with one screw. That's why it's referred to as a one-hole shroud. This is a later version of the one-hole shroud issued with the Rhino 2. Now, a common version of the shroud on a lot of higher-end helmets these days, and really even a lot of basic helmets that don't have a molded-in shroud, is what's referred to as the three-hole shroud. So again, you can see pretty clearly why it would be called the three-hole shroud. There are three holes that screw in to attach this to the helmet. See right here, an ops core three-hole shroud mounted to a helmet. So different shrouds are going to have different kind of interfaces. There's not that many of them out there, but there's enough to make it confusing. So the most common interface that you're going to find is what's called the universal pattern, which is what Neurotos calls it. Wilcox refers to it as their L4 pattern, but it's this rectangular bracket that pretty much all of these mounts, all of these shrouds have a universal interface that will click into any of these shrouds. So chances are, if you're not familiar with what kind of shroud you have, what type of interface your shroud has, you're probably using some sort of variation of the universal or L4 shroud interface. It's the same one used by the military. It's the same one used on most of the high-end helmets. Again, there's a couple of less common proprietary ones that are just enough to throw some confusion into the mix, but L4 universal is going to be by far the most common thing that you're going to find. So the next component, obviously, if you look at the PVS-14 and you look at this mount, you need to have some way to attach the PVS-14 to the mount in order to get it to all function. So generally speaking, with PVS-14, we refer to that part as the J-arm. So this is a USGI J-arm. You can probably tell why it gets that name. It's a pretty basic piece of equipment. You can unscrew this thumb screw and pull up on the arm and rotate it around so that you can change what eye the PVS-14 is on. And you can see here it threads into this little hole on the PVS-14. Very simple. Here you can see it attached to the device. Alright, so now that we've kind of established what some of the basic terms are in terms of these different mount and arm and device setups, we can start talking about some of the different options that are available if you're getting a PVS-14. Obviously, the most basic setup, again, is some variation of the USGI Rhino or Rhino 2 mount. It's the most common. It's usually the easiest to find because there are literally thousands of them out there. You can find these things at a surplus store for like 30 bucks. They're going to be the most common out there. So the USGI J-arm uses what's referred to as a bayonet or horn interface in order for the J-arm to attach to the mount. So you can see here on the PVS-14 J-arm, it's probably a little easier to see on this one, this little horn, also known as a bayonet, is what clicks in to this receptacle. And that's how it attaches to the mount. Now, one of the issues with the standard USGI setup is that it's actually not all that stable. You can see how much movement I'm able to induce here in the mount and shroud and J-arm interface. So that USGI bayonet interface is really not manufactured to that high tolerances. There's a lot of variation in them, and again, this device has been manufactured for over 20 years, so there's a lot of different manufacturers who've made a lot of different, not quite versions, because they're all technically supposed to be to the same spec, but the tolerances have always been pretty generous. And then finally, what a lot of people have probably noticed if they've used the PVS-14 in the military is it's very easy to accidentally release from the mount. You basically look at it wrong and it'll drop right out of the mount. So generally speaking, for a lot of users, especially if they're getting into a PVS-14 for the first time, they get a little bit of sticker shock with the price of the device and all of the accessories. So these USGI J-arms, most PVS-14s that you buy, no matter who you buy them from, are probably going to come with some sort of USGI J-arm. Our TNV PVS-14 units, they will all ship with a standard USGI J-arm. So for most people looking to have some sort of upgrade that don't want to use the standard Rhino mount, one of the mounts that we suggest is the Wilcox L4G11 Army. So, as the name might imply, it was designed for the U.S. Army as a replacement to the legacy Rhino. It does still use the bayonet horn interface and snaps into the device, but it's got a couple of improvements. So obviously, first of all, the mount is a good bit more solid. It's machined to extremely high tolerances. And probably one of the most important aspects of it is it has elevation adjustment so that you can adjust where on your head the height of the mount and therefore the device. It's also got standard tilt controls, but one of the biggest advantages of the L4G11, if you're going to stick with the USGI J-arm format, is that you can actually see here that there's a little screw that you can use to increase or decrease the tension on this bayonet interface. So it keeps it a little bit more solid in the mount. And you can tighten that down to the extent that you desire to get as much stability as possible out of this configuration. Finally, you can see here that the release button, the release mechanism, obviously it's still fairly easily accessible for when you want to do so intentionally, but unlike the USGI Rhino mount, it's not as prominent and it's not as easy to accidentally depress. And for most people who are not looking to spend too much money with their first purchase and just want a good way to mount their PVS-14 that's an improvement over the standard USGI configuration, the Wilcox Industries L4G11 is typically what we'll recommend. that's kind of going to be the greatest balance between cost and stability to get it mounted onto your helmet. And again, you can kind of see here that the Wilcox mount pushes the device a little bit further forward outside of the from the front of the helmet, but it also keeps it much more low profile than that USGI Rhino did. So again, you can see how high it sticks up over your head. And again, for comparison, Wilcox Industries L4G11, like I said, is kind of a compromise option. It's about as stable and secure as you're going to get using the USGI bayonet interface. That being said, you know, if you are willing to spend a little bit more money to get some more stability out of your helmet setup using the PVS-14, what you can do is you can upgrade to a Dovetail interface. So you can see here this Dovetail interface, which is this little shoe here, compared to the Rhino arm and the bayonet interface. So this little Dovetail shoe is machined to extremely high tolerances. This J-arm is manufactured by Wilcox Industries as well. And you can see I have a Wilcox Industries L4G24 mount. And you can see the Dovetail shoe clicks into the socket. Very clean, very solid connection there. So the Dovetail interface really was originally designed for the PVS-7 Alpha and the PVS-7 Charlie. So it was designed for a heavier device, and pretty much any binocular night vision goggle today is going to use this BNVS interface, whether you're talking about the PVS-15, whether you're talking about the PVS-31, or whether you're talking about the RNVG, DTNVG, any of the commercial systems, as well as our powered bridge mounts and non-powered bridge mounts. So there's a couple of different ways that you can get into a Dovetail setup for a PVS-14. Right now I'm going to show you the components for the Wilcox setup. But Narotos also makes Dovetail arms. There's some options from Knight's Armament Company. All of them are good options. The Wilcox stuff is what I happen to have on hand right now, so it's going to be what I show you. Another big advantage to upgrading to a Dovetail setup right off the bat is the fact that if you should ever upgrade to some sort of binocular setup, whether you're going to do that with bridged PVS-14s or whether you're going to do it with a set of dedicated binoculars, you'll already have a Dovetail mount that you can use, and you won't have to go out and start buying new mounts, ultimately spending more money to upgrade the mount systems that you have. So in terms of installation, you know, it's very similar to the standard PVS-14 Rhino mount and setup and G11, the mount, the articulating arm, snaps into the shroud. The J-arm, and again, so this is the Wilcox arm. Some people will refer to it as the I-arm or the straight arm. There's also a version that's dog-legged a little bit further back to kind of reduce the eye relief for people who want it closer to their eye. We continue to call this a J-arm. I guess it's technically still got a curve if you look at it from the front, but you know, it is a little bit, it is straight compared to the dog leg on the PVS-14. So again, this Wilcox setup attaches to the PVS-14 the same way, using that threaded hole, and it attaches to the device. J-arm gets slotted in to the Dovetail socket, and there you go. Again, just like the G11, you have a lot less height over the top of the helmet compared to the USGI Rhino. The G24 is what's referred to as a push-button mount versus a force to overcome. So with a lot of the standard Army mounts, they're what's referred to as force to overcome. So you just push up on it, and there's a detent and a spring that locks it in the up or down position. Push-button mounts like the G24, in order to be a little bit more stable, they don't have that force to overcome feature. Instead, you have to push this button and push the device up. Now there's, a lot of people have different preferences in terms of whether they prefer force to overcome mounts versus push button mounts. Again, there are force to overcome and push button versions of both Dovetail and USGI bayonet interfaces. So it's kind of a topic for another time, but it is an option that you have, whether you want to stick with a push button mount or a force to overcome mount. So once you've kind of got the device in place, obviously, and you can do this with any kind of mount, but another good thing to do is to go ahead and secure your device. The dovetail is going to be a lot more difficult to accidentally release. That being said, shit happens. So it's possible for this to release from the device, or even for the mount to be poorly secured to the helmet. So what I like to do is I like to put one of these little split rings on the PVS-14 where the lanyard hole is. Anytime I get a new PVS-14 that comes with that shoelace mounted through these holes, I take that thing off, and God knows what happens to it after that. I toss them in the trash. So this is our base jump lanyard. It's designed to attach to the Ops Core bump helmet, but it can be adapted for a whole bunch of other different types of helmets. Obviously, this is a Wilcox Industries lanyard. If you haven't figured out, I'm a big Wilcox Industries fan. And it's really fairly simple retractable lanyard that attaches to the helmet. You can see here on this one, this is a Wilcox one-hole mount. So the lanyards come in a lot of different configurations. So don't think that you need to have this exact setup in order to use the lanyard. That being said, you can take the lanyard, and you can clip the little carabiner onto the split ring, and your device is secured. So if for whatever reason it were to accidentally separate, you're not going to lose your device. Obviously, if you're inside or something like that, the worst that'll happen is it, maybe hits the ground or something like that. But if you're out in the field, if you're doing some sort of maritime or aerial operations, it can be a big problem if you end up having the device for whatever reason separate from your helmet. Again, you can see it with the mount as well. Again, with like the L4G24, it is designed to separate from the helmet with enough force to prevent you from having some sort of neck injury if the mount gets caught up. So it's got a breakaway function. And again, if that breakaway function kicks in, then it's going to be very good to be able to retain your device in some sort of way. That way you can prevent unnecessary damage and loss. Alright guys, so those are some of the different mount variations and options available for the PVS-14 monocular night vision device. All of these parts and accessories are available at TNVC.com. Talk to you next time.